Good morning, everyone, and welcome, in many cases, welcome back to Coffee with the Legislators. My name is Carter Fong. I'm the Executive Director at the Dickinson Area Chamber of Commerce, where we aim to connect business and community with our elected and appointed officials because a well-informed public is in everyone's best interest. This event will conclude 3 events in a week for the Chamber and 6 consecutive Saturday mornings of Coffee with the Legislators. We're going to take a 2-week break from this series after this week. So next Saturday at 10 a.m., I will be in my pajamas watching cartoons on the couch. And for many of you Sesame Street folks in the crowd, we have graduated in our house to the Paw Patrol and Bluey are our favorites. But on with the show, and we're glad that Consolidated is back recording this broadcast for Channel 18 and for the Chamber YouTube channel. And on that note, we'd ask that you please silence your cell phones at this time. As we begin, we'd like to thank our hosts at the Dickinson Area Public Library, along with our sponsor for the day, Deb Nelson at DLN Consulting. Thank you for being here. Our sponsors make it possible for us to provide refreshments. Please help yourself. As Dickinson's population has grown, so has this series. While District 37 is entirely within Dickinson city limits, nearly half the population of District 36 now resides in Dickinson as well, while District 39 covers the western edge of Dickinson to the Montana and South Dakota borders. Our elected and appointed leaders have constituents here and elsewhere, but they've chosen to be here today, and we appreciate their time. Today's event features our special guest, State Auditor Josh Gallion, joined by Representative Gary Kreidt of District 36, Representative Vicki Steiner of District 37, and Senator Greg Kessel from District 39. We will hear from them in that order during the first hour. And during the second hour, we will open the forum up to public questions and comments, limited to 3 minutes per individual. We will conclude by 12 noon. At this time, please welcome State Auditor Josh Gallion.
Okay, I went from the back of the room answering a question to right to the podium, so appreciate that. Let me just pull up my notes here. So again, my name is Josh Gallion. I serve the citizens of North Dakota as a state auditor. I have been doing so since 2017. I'm the 17th state auditor of the state of North Dakota. I succeeded Bob Peterson. He was a state auditor for 20 years, and his dad, Bob Peterson, for 24 years before that. So I have the distinction of being the first auditor in 44 years not named Bob Peterson. Fantastic. So a little bit about myself. I'm a military veteran. I served in the United States Air Force. I was born and raised in Spokane, Washington. Grew up there until I was about 19 years old. Looking for something else in life. Thought that there was more. Enlisted. I got sentenced, as I like to put it, to Minot Air Force Base. And as a 19-year-old kid, I had to look that up on a map. Where is this place? It seemed like it was the end of the earth. Lo and behold, that's where I met my wife. I have come to love North Dakota. This has been home ever since. We live in Bismarck with our 2 daughters. I cannot tell you how much I love the state, the people, the culture. And to me, that's very evident, even with what my wife does. And she's the Bismarck Figure Skating Club skating director. She has taken a small town, and I think around here we don't think of Bismarck as a small town. But she takes those kids, and we compete at levels across this nation. The teams that she's going up against come from New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., and St. Louis. And these North Dakota kids are right there on their heels, if not beating them, time and time again. And so again, here in this state, we might be small. And as the auditor's office has been explained to me, we are small but mighty. I think that's the best way to explain the heart and the spirit of this entire state. And again, to me, it's very evidenced in the amazing work that my wife does with these great North Dakota students. So just a little bit of background. My education background, I do have a master's degree from the University of North Dakota, and I'm proud to say that my undergraduate degree is from Dickinson State University. I hold an accounting degree and a business administration degree. I also have an associate's degree from Bismarck State College. All that means is I spent a whole lot of time in the classroom. But very happy, very proud of that background. The education that I've received, it's all North Dakota. And thanks to my military experience bringing me here. Work experience, again, as a state auditor, I've been doing that for over 6 years. Before that, I was the Chief Financial Officer for the Public Service Commission. Served there, learning government accounting. That's really what my background is in government accounting and budgeting and finance. Learning the other side of the coin, because those accountants out there are producing the records that the auditor's office now audits. And so taking that experience and now applying that to the other side, it gave me a much deeper perspective on what the auditor's office is looking at. Your auditor's office has 61 full-time employees. We have also one of the best internship programs in the state of North Dakota. The only state agency that is larger is the Department of Transportation. They also have about 1,000 employees. We're 60. And so we've really created that outreach to try to get ourselves into these campuses, provide these opportunities for students. And as a lot of my colleagues in state government talk about workforce shortages, we don't have that problem. Right now we have 9 interns on staff. Many of those interns are interested in full-time employment. And so that has been our greatest pipeline of filling some of the vacant positions that we have. And so I applaud the work of our business manager, my deputy state auditor, who has taken a lot of steps in creating those opportunities for us. The auditor's office is comprised of 5 different divisions. We've got our operations division. They're the ones that, unlike in Ohio, they keep the trains running on time and on the tracks. We also have our state agency team. They're the ones that conduct the audits of all state agencies. We have over 80 of them. And the university system, so all of the campus and the system office. We also have what a lot of people aren't aware of. We have a division that audits mineral royalty on federally leased lands. So if there is mineral extraction happening on those leases, we have a team that calculates to make sure that the federal government is receiving the proper royalty payments. Now for me as a state official, the part of that program that I appreciate the most is because when we know what the federal government is supposed to be owed, we know what the state of North Dakota is supposed to be owed. And so our team works hand in hand with the Department of Trust Lands and the Treasurer's Office to make sure that we are communicating that information to them to ensure that the counties and these local municipalities are receiving the proper share of those mineral rights. We also have the division that for me, I have spent probably the most time working on in the last 6 years, and that is our local government division. Here in North Dakota, we have over 2,000 local government entities across this state under the jurisdiction of the State Auditor's Office. And again, if you recall, 61 employees. We do all of those audits. We look at all of those mineral rights. We look at all of these local governments. And we also audit all of the federal funds that are expensed by the state of North Dakota. At this point, we've gone from $4.4 billion in the previous 2-year period. We're at $6.6 billion. So we look at all of that. Plus, we conduct the state's annual comprehensive financial report. So the state agencies, they don't produce financial records, and I'll get to this here in a little bit. All of that information, which is compiled through our enterprise accounting system, Office of Management and Budget compiles that. That's a major audit of ours, but that is based on the state's overall financial health. Now, one of the things I'd love to talk about and kind of get into it, today, most of my questions are surrounding the current situation with the legislature, and particularly House Bill 1508, which is attempting to remove the auditor's office ability to charge some of these fees. It talks about our ability to charge the federal programs, some of these other different entities. But what I like to do is back up. Okay, that's a very small picture. So let's go back to the beginning. In 2017, the auditor's office that I inherited was under attack. The previous administration attempted to look at university systems, particularly foundations, and some of these endowments. We want, and again, this community is very aware of some of the challenges that come with those foundations and some of the endowments. What our team, again, before me, was trying to accomplish was to ensure that anybody who donated to those foundations, which that's a private entity, but that those donations, when they transferred to the university, were actually being done in accordance with that donor's wishes. The legislature passed specific legislation to restrict the auditor's office from accessing that information. And in my first session, the performance audit manager who was trying to do that work was specifically targeted. That individual had their position number listed in the auditor's office budget bill to be terminated by the legislature. The legislature was specifically firing one of my employees. Thankfully, the governor vetoed that bill, and very unusually, the auditor's office budget in that session wound up as an attachment to the Office of Management budget. So we were funded. The position number was removed, but that position was still cut and that funding still removed. That employee, the damage was already done. That employee was gone. They asked for a termination, a resignation was provided, and we did offer 3-month severance package to help that transition period for that individual. That team to this day is no longer in existence. That team has fallen apart because of this action. There's only one employee remaining. The rest of those positions have been repurposed. That was my first session. Welcome to public office. Second session came about. Between the first session and the second session, the things that we tried to accomplish is to inform the citizens. So we developed a communication strategy that would put information in your hands. Because as somebody who works for you, I believe that you have a right to know how your government is spending your money. So we started doing press releases, and we started putting communication out there to make sure that you're aware of what's going on. The legislature did not appreciate that, did not like that we were putting this information out. The law that was introduced and passed, it went through both chambers. The governor signed it into law. It inserted the legislature into the executive branch, restricting our ability to initiate performance audits. Wanted to make sure that they could decide what performance audits we could do, when they could be released. Now, to put that into context, when we conduct an audit, we're looking back at a 2-year period. If we wait till the end of that 2-year period, it takes us 10 months to conduct an audit. We're now talking about information that could be 3 years old. The Legislative Audit and Fiscal Review Committee that we provide this information to, they didn't meet at times for 10, 11 months. So if they waited 10, 11 months after we completed a report, we're now talking about information that's 4 years old. And how many of us understand information, for it to be relevant, it has to be timely. 4-year-old information has almost zero value. That is why we changed our communication strategy. We wanted to put this information out there, make it available to the public, because it is you that holds government accountable. It is not me. I know a lot of people think the auditor's office is the accountability arm. You would be wrong. We are the transparency arm. We are the ones that are constantly out there looking at state government, local governments, federal government, peeking in all the nooks and crannies, trying to make sure that everything is happening the way that the legislature designed. So that is why we want to put this information out there, for it to be timely and for that you, the electors, can hold your government accountable. So then we get to the third session. After they want to stop us from communicating to the citizens, they come in, and the concept, and the 2 majority leaders came in with a bill to prevent performance audits altogether. We wanted to have financial statement audits for all of state government. And the problems that came with that is, as I talked about the annual comprehensive financial report, our state financials are consolidated. Individual state agencies do not have financial statements. The skill set to be able to do that is tremendous. If any of you have ever tried to compile financial statements, it's hard work. It takes a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience to put those together. That requirement would have been placed on every single state agency in state government. The cost, the time, and the resources would have been tremendous. And so, and I know Rich is here today in the audience. That process alone, and I think I could say at that point, we had some conflict, and we had some differences of opinions. But I will say that bill right there, it forced us to come together, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the opportunities to work with Senator Warner. We were able to discuss some of these issues, identify some of these flaws, and through communication and understanding, he demonstrated a level of respect to the auditor's office. We reciprocated that. That bill ultimately turned into a great bill for us and for you. One of the things that came out of that bill was whistleblower protection. Now, if an employee has an issue in state government, they can contact the auditor's office. We can keep their information confidential so that they don't have the fear of repercussions for bringing that to us. Again, this is the positive that happens when people, even if they disagree, will sit across from the table, discuss those differences with the focus of making sure that we are producing the best results for the citizens. So Senator Warner, Rich, now, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the communication, the level of respect, and I can't say enough how much I respect you and your leadership. You are missed there at the Capitol this session. So that's a little history that brings us to House Bill 1508, facing the auditor's office. This bill and the prime sponsor made zero attempt to contact the auditor's office. We tried on numerous occasions to sit down and visit. We wanted to know what problem were they trying to solve. Would not at all sit across the table from us like Senator Warner did. This bill restricts our ability to 1,000th of 1% of an operating budget as a fee to charge for an audit. Now, for those of you who might be good at math, 1,000th of 1% is a ridiculously small number. On a $1 million operating budget, the bill that we could charge them would be $10. You cannot conduct an audit for $10. My people don't work that cheap, and if I tried to force them, I wouldn't have any people. The other issue that this bill does is it forced us or prevented us from charging the federal government. The single audit that I mentioned. We conduct that audit to the single government. We actually charge that audit back to those federal programs. It is an audit that we are required to do by accepting those funds. This bill would prevent us from doing that. The university system supports that prevention. I don't think that's a good idea, because you know what that means? The North Dakota taxpayers are now subsidizing the federal government. That audit has to be done. I believe we should be charging those programs. What we do with those funds is we take that money from those federal programs and we put it right back into the general fund. We give it back to you and back to the legislature to reappropriate. It covers the cost of us doing that, to providing that service that is required by the federal government for us accepting those funds. Another component that this bill tried to accomplish, it is trying to accomplish, I guess it passed in this form on the House. They want to place a requirement that all of our audits are approved by a CPA. Now, I am not a CPA. My background is in more government accounting, but I'm a military veteran. To us, a CPA is a skill set. And for me, I find it offensive that the legislature wants to elevate one skill set above another. We just did a fantastic audit of the health department and human services. We looked at child abuse cases at human services. We looked at COVID vaccine management at the health department. Our medical auditor actually did that. She's an RN. There is no value in having a CPA review the work of our medical auditor. The way we approach skill sets is we apply the right tool for the job. We have 18 CPAs in the auditor's office, and we make sure that we leverage those skill sets where appropriate. So I disagree with an arbitrary restriction or an attempt to place a CPA above all others in the auditor's office. Very few elected state auditors across this country are actually CPAs. We see a diverse background, a diverse skill set, and to me, our greatest strength in the auditor's office is our diversity. And I want to make sure that we continue that diversity going forward. The last part of this bill, which I think is probably the most damaging, is to our local government team. Our local government team, who's looking at these 2,000 entities, the 400 of those that require an audit. Again, keep in mind, we only do about 70 of them. So in total, for those who like to know the market share, we're about 15% of the market share in the state of North Dakota for local government audits. Very small, very small. The majority of that workload is actually on the backs of the private sector. So we work with our private sector partners in the state, the CPA firms that are out there doing some of this work. This bill would also restrict us to 1,000th of 1% to charge for those fees. Our local government team relies on those fees that come into our operating fund. We bill for our costs. That money goes to pay their payroll. It goes to pay the operating so that they can continue providing those value-added services. This bill undermines that. If the legislature doesn't put $6.5 million in general funds into the auditor's budget to support this, that service goes away. So you can talk about how they love the audits, and if you go back and listen to the committee work, none of them are complaining about the audits. They're not talking about the work that the amazing staff at the auditor's office is doing. But what they are is indirectly trying to remove the funding from behind it. And if you do that, you end the audits. I think that's wrong. And that's why I've been very vocal against this. And I have been very upset. It caused me to write an op-ed. Because I think this is wrong. Being accused of money laundering and double dipping, double billing on the floor of the House, I think that's irresponsible. The mistruths and the misinformation being spread, emails are floating around the legislature about how we are overcharging. And if you've seen this number, 394% increase in our ending fund balance, this has been going around. That is actually an accounting error by OMB. When the governor's recommended budget reduced our FTE request from the 14 that we asked for local governments down to 7, those requests include a revenue projection and expense, because those people generate the revenue that they need to cover their costs. OMB failed to remove the revenue from 7 of those positions, or approximately $1.6 million. Our ending balance, the cash reserve that we maintain just to maintain cash flow, so for those of you who understand business, you can't run down to a zero every month. You have to have money from one period to the next to continue ensuring that you can pay your people. We try to make sure that we can maintain 1 to 2 months payroll in the bank. Because if we have clients that don't pay us, we want to make sure that we can continue, or if they get delayed in paying us, we can continue making payroll and taking care of our people. These are the things that we're facing today. These are the issues that we're seeing. Nobody in the legislature has tried to clarify these. The information that I get are from constituents, and this information that's floating around. People want to make sure, is this really right? And I can tell you, no. The prime sponsors arguments, there's about 9 of them. We can dispel every single one of them by just zooming out, like I did here today. Let's just back out a little bit and see the issues that the auditor's office is facing. I cannot tell you how much that the staff in that office love what they do. They love working for you. They love providing that transparency. And as a state auditor, I want to make sure that we can continue providing those value-added services. Yes, sometimes our audit reports lead to difficult discussions. But if we're going to address some of these, you have to bring it to light. And I am committed to doing that as long as I serve you as the state auditor of this great state. With that, am I out of time?
We're going to come back to you.
Okay.
I've read your op-ed. I've read other perspectives on your work. I'm confident they will have questions and comments in the second hour, and we will lead with those.
Wonderful.
For now, State Auditor Josh Gallion.
Thank you.
We'll go on to our legislative panel from District 36. I live in 36. I met him just half an hour ago, but I'm confident he is not new to the legislative process. Gary Kreidt, welcome, District 36.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I reside in New Salem, but I do have ties to Dickinson, going back a number of years ago. I spent the 5 years of my life living in Dickinson back in 1960. I have ties still to Dickinson. I have a son that's on the faculty at Dickinson State. My daughter-in-law is the administrator of St. Luke's Nursing Home here in Dickinson. I have a granddaughter and their family still live in Dickinson. Yonner, who he's a professor of arts up at Dickinson State, and my granddaughter is a stay-at-home mother. They have 3 children, and she homeschools them. She does have a degree in secondary education. I'm assuming when my great-grandkids are growing up, she'll probably go back to teaching again. I was born in New Salem, raised there a number of years ago. We on a family farm. I lived on a farm right 4 miles west of New Salem. Graduated from New Salem High School a long time ago, and have my family, my kids still live in the area. I've got 5 children. Tim Kreidt is the youngest. Some of you may know him. I have second son that lives in St. Paul. His name is Gary. There are 2 of us, which is probably a dangerous thing, but anyway, there are 2 of us. My daughter is in the middle. We have 5 children. She lives right out of New Salem. They used to have a dairy farm. They no longer dairy, but are strictly grain farmers and beef cattle. My second son lives in Hebron. He's kind of semi-retired. He worked in the oil fields. He had a trucking company out there, and he hauled the clear water out to the oil drilling wells, and did that for a number of years. And my oldest son is the farmer. We have a family farm, which was homesteaded in 1883 by my great-grandfather. And we still live, I have a home there. My son has a home there. And my folks who are no longer living, we have their house is still on the farm. I've pretty well divested from all of the farming. We did own a dairy for a number of years. It's kind of interesting. My great-grandfather was a farmer on the homestead that we live on, and then my grandfather was the postmaster in New Salem, and he back then that was a presidential appointment. And so when he was a Republican, as I am, he was the postmaster. If the Democrat president was elected, he had to sit out. But he was postmaster for a number of years. Herbert Hoover was the president. I've got the certificate of his appointment signed by Herbert Hoover hanging down in my office back in the 30s, so kind of interesting. Then my dad, who graduated from high school in New Salem in 1934, of course, my grandfather was postmaster, so the farm was rented out. My father then, after he graduated from high school, he moved back onto the farm, and he farmed till 1976 when he had health problems, and so I took over the farms, but I have to tell you, I was no farmer. I was in the healthcare business at that time. I did that for 30 years. And so we had hired help running the farms, and of course I had boys that were in high school at that time. They helped out. And so when my oldest son graduated from college, he said, Dad, I'm going to come back and farm. I said, there's a lot better things to do than be a farmer. I said, no. He said, I want to be a farmer. And he came back and he took over the farms at that time. And he is still the manager of our farm, along with my grandson. We have a family corporation, and of course there's going to be a corporate farming bill coming up in this session, and our family corporation for farming has many advantages that allow us different tax breaks and things like that, and that the family corporation has worked out well for us. My career was in long-term care. I was licensed. I no longer hold my license, but I was a licensed long-term care administrator for 30 years and retired from that when I became elected to the legislature back in a long time ago, 2002. So, and the only reason, I've been in 3 different districts now. I started out in District 31, was active in that, and I knew I was going to be retiring in 2002, so I decided, I'd been asked a number of times over the years to run for the legislature, but with my position and had other things going that I just, wouldn't do a job that I thought would be really the time to be a good legislature. So I always told the party or the district that, when I retire, I will, run for the legislature. So I knew I was going to retire. In fact, announced 2 years ahead of time that I was going to retire. And I was in 31. I was going to run for the Senate in District 31. Well, in 2000 was the redistricting, so I came to a redistricting meeting one evening, and everybody there kind of looked at me, and they said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm here to, active in 31. Well, you're in 33. I didn't even know I had moved. So, an opportunity opened in 33, which was then at that time Beulah Hazen Center, that area up there in northern Mandan. So I ran for that position and beat out a popular Democratic candidate, John Mahoney. Some of you probably don't know him, but he was an upcoming star in the Democratic Party at that time. And I did win that election, and the first 2 times that I ran for the legislature in 2002, and then again in 4, I had competition. After that, I've had nobody run against me since then. So either I'm doing a good job or people just don't care. I don't know. But I never had any competition, which makes things easy. But I'm happy to be in District 36. Actually, back when I was going to run, most of the district, now that is 36, was in 31, all in Hebron, New Salem. And so kind of back to where I started when I was first thinking about running for the legislature. I serve on the Appropriations Committee. I've served on there since 2007. I rely a lot on the people in policy, like Representative Steiner here. When it comes to policy bills, being on appropriation, our pretty much main goal is we're not supposed to mess with policy, and we don't, right, Vicki? But our side and appropriations is the money side. And I serve on the section which is called the Human Resource section. And we have, in that section, we have the largest budget in state government, and that's the Department of Human Services. And that, this session now, that budget is over $5 billion. That's a lot of money. That's not pocket change. That's a lot of money. And the Senate has that bill the first half of the session. After crossover now, next week, we will have that in the section that I'm in appropriations, and we will spend the second half of the session working on that one budget, because there's so many entities and involved, so many people, and the safety and the health welfare of those individuals here in the state of North Dakota. So it's a big budget to work on. The first half of the session, we had a lot of small budgets, but we do have three fairly large budgets in our section of appropriation. We have the Department of Health. Now, just give you a little history. Last session, there was a bill that passed. I was a co-sponsor of that bill. In fact, I'll tell you, when I came into the legislature, one of my goals was to have the Department of Health and the Department of Human Services become one. Well, it took 20 years to do it, but we did have it finally come together. But this session, the Department of Health, that budget is separate from the Department of Human Services, but on July of this year, they will become a one department, and next session, there will be just one budget, and that'll be the Department of Health and Human Services. Just might mention a couple things. We also have corrections in our budget, and the Department of Health. Now, in those two budgets, there's a couple of major building projects that are going to probably be happening. In the Department of Health, they want a new state lab, and we finished that budget last week, and we've included in that budget the money to build a new state lab. Now, we toured the state lab, and I've been out there, and it really needs replacing. I mean, the roof leaks, they've got tarps up in there to keep the water from running into the facility. They've got 5-gallon pails sitting around collecting water. And so last session, I believe it might have been even a special session, we did appropriate $15 million to get that project started. Now, the total project's going to be $70 million. We did appropriate the $55 million in the Health Department budget that'll be coming to the floor this week. And it's money out of the ARPA funds, or federal funds, that came into the coronavirus that we had here, a couple of years ago. So there's $70 million to do this project, and that's all they can spend. Now they've got some plans that have been developed, and it looks like it's going to be a 3-story building. Right now they're anticipating with that $70 million they can do about 100,000 square feet. We all know we've got inflation, and we might have to scale that square footage back some, but we're hoping it'll be close to the $100,000 when the project is complete. The other big project that we've got, and that's in the Department of Corrections, the department wants to build a new facility for women in Mandan at the Youth Correctional Center, and that's $161 million. That's a big project. Now, how that's going to turn out, I don't know. You know, these bills that we have will go over to the Senate if they'll fine-tune that. But that money comes out of the shift funding, which is another bucket that's in the legislature. And again, that's for $161 million. We don't plan on, the women's prison right now is located out in New England. We don't plan on, you know, it's a contract, it's a multi-county contract over there. And this may become a treatment center after this plan goes through for the women's facility in Mandan. There is no plan on, you know, closing that facility down. I did talk with Dave Kravinoff, who is the director of the prisons, and they've done a good job out there. I mean, I give them all the credit in the world for the work they've done with that facility in New England. And we told Dave we want to continue a contract with them in providing some type of service in that area, treatment or, you know, whatever. So just wanted to be aware of that project. So otherwise, I guess I'll wrap it up, and I guess we'll have questions later. So thank you. I'm happy to be here today.
Next up will be Representative Vicki Steiner. She came prepared. She had a nice PowerPoint, visual aids. Library tech support has not come back. I think that means they're not able to solve the tech issue. Would it help you to have your own slideshow in front of you here with the computer? I could.
No.
No, don't need it. We're going to go without. Hey, Representative Vicki Steiner, District 37.
Good morning. Thank you. Just a couple things. When Josh Gallion talks about the legislature passed a bill that he is critical of, when the legislature, sounds like we all unanimously voted for it. I didn't vote for that bill. Correct. And I don't know a lot about the bill except what I learned on the floor fight, but I have my head buried in finance and tax and government and veterans affairs. So all I knew was that Legislative Audit and Fiscal Review, which they call LAFRC, felt that some of his performance reviews were overzealous, and they wanted to send him a message. I didn't like that message, and so I voted against the bill because I thought they could have worked it out a little bit better. But I think the Senate will probably have the job of working that out. And afterwards, I just said, why couldn't we get this resolved? And they just said, well, we don't want him doing performance reviews. We prefer he does some other type of review. But they also want to be notified before it hits the paper. So that's another big one, is they don't want to read about it in the paper when something is, that's what I was told. Just don't surprise us with stuff. So anyway, I didn't support the bill, but it passed anyway. And then also, when they talk about building the women's prison, I think I've been in real estate almost going on 3 years now. So I'm an agent with Home and Land Company. And we have beautiful state property on the river on the south side of Bismarck, and then we also have beautiful river property in Mandan. And it's technically not good use of property to put a prison with a view of the river, when you could sell that land and take that money to pay for a prison somewhere, because they really don't need a view for the short time they're there. And you could probably pay for part of the prison with selling the view. I'm just saying, it's just a thought, Gary. There was a bill that did propose that, but I believe it was defeated. I was on that bill. I think Representative Schatz has a bill that says sell the land and move them somewhere out by Glen Ullin. But anyway, they'd probably still be in your district. You have some land at New Salem, good, that would work really well. We've had a couple oil tax bills we passed out this week. One of them was the tax trigger that some of you had brought up the first time I was here. That did pass, and the Senate will take a look at it. Basically, it takes a trigger off, and so the oil tax is always the same, 10%, it's always the same. So the tax would not trigger if oil went over $95 for 3 months. So that is good for our area, really. And then we have another one that's going to be, that passed. I carried it yesterday. It's the re-stimulation of older Bakken oil wells. And we have about 5,400 wells that are producing less than 125 barrels per day. And we heard from the oil and gas director that if we could incent the companies to go back in and spend about $5 million on the original parent well, because they'll sometimes have 8 wells on a site, and that parent well might have been drilled in 2008, 2012, but technology has gotten much more efficient, and they can actually go in, and that's what some of the pictures I wanted to show you. Instead of just openings, single openings and small fracs out, the new guns take it out farther, and that would actually give more life to those wells. So we could have incremental production that we wouldn't normally get. It actually extends the life of the Bakken. And the rules are, to be eligible, the well has to be older than 5 years or 60 months and have less than 125 barrels of production. And when the production gets too low, then it doesn't make financial sense to go in and do this. So you have to catch them kind of in their midlife crisis, if you will. So when they're about 12 years old or so, 15 years old. MHA Nation does not want to come in at this time, but we left in the bill an opt-in option for the tribe. So at some point, they probably will have to do this as well if they want to save their wells. But right now, they said they will probably try to do some other things like build roads or help them with water or pipelines to see if they can do other things rather than do the tax break. But this tax reduction models previous oil tax code that we've had in place before. That's the first 75,000 barrels or 18 months, whichever occurs first. So, and then MHA Nation cannot just opt in and opt out, opt in, opt out, because it's too confusing for our tax department. So the tax department said they'll have to wait till the next session. If they want to, they can opt in, but if they change their mind and they don't want to offer the tax reduction anymore, the legislature would have to approve it 2 years later. So there is a time frame there so that it doesn't go too quickly and it causes problems with administration. Straddle wells are those wells that flow between the reservation boundary. They're accounted for in the bill as well, because the tribe, they will always get the tax that they are looking to receive until they opt in. And then the Industrial Commission sets the rules and the certification requirements on how much of that is incremental oil. And so anyway, it's about $150,750 tax reduction per well. And it should give us some new life and some additional revenue moving forward in the future. And so anyway, I was so prepared yesterday because there was quite a discussion about taking the trigger off the oil tax. And I thought, this is going to be really, I got to be ready for this. So I had sheets and sheets of statistics. I was so ready. And then no questions, and it passed unanimous. So I don't know, I can't really read the floor very well. So anyway, that did pass yesterday, and the Senate will take a look at it after crossover. And then we had talked about 1446, which was the 10-year bill that Representative LaFleur had discussed the last time I was here. And that did pass out of GVA by 832. So that'll go to the floor, I think, on Monday. And a lot of it was amended. So I put the bill back there. The new amended bill is back on the table. Some of the things that were discussed that day for the amendment, things were removed. The big one that was put back in is that the faculty member may appeal the review to the Chancellor of the State Board of Higher Education. So that is in the new bill. And the state indemnifies the members of the State Board against lawsuits. And they took out that the professors have to generate more tuition or recruit. And then also social media, it was pulled as we discussed it the last time we were here. So it also too, it's required that there is a halfway progressive report due by the December 31st, 2025, and then there's a final report due December 31st, 2026. Because this is a pilot just for Dickinson State and Bismarck State College, and it says specifically in here the pilot program may not apply to a research university because NDSU and UND have been lobbying pretty heavy on it, and they have nothing to do with the bill. But they think that, you know, once this could prove to be effective and maybe makes DSU very competitive with other universities, that possibly, and they're right, it could come to their doorstep as well. So they are lobbying against it right now. On school vouchers, I've heard a lot about from people in the Dickinson community liking the bill 1532. I haven't seen it yet, but there is it's basically a study, or there is going to be a little bit of money for to follow students. And as I was told, and I haven't had a chance to study the bill, but I was told it does not affect funding for Dickinson Public Schools. So I will see where it's at when it actually comes to the floor. Some things are still sitting in committee, so I don't know where that one is at. But I've had so many emails on it, and I do support it. I just haven't seen the final version. And then the diaper bill was reversed. We had a do not pass on the diaper bill in finance and tax. We have no sales tax on adult diapers at the current time, but we have a sales tax on diapers for babies. And someone said, well, how do you feel about the bill? And I said, well, it depends. No. I can't resist it. But we did take it back to finance and tax, and it did receive a reverse vote. We still have some people opposed to it because it's a carve-out, but we did carve out for adults. So anyway, I'm hopeful. That comes up Monday. That's 1177. And it's not a big fiscal note, but it's just kind of the principle of the thing of trying to support children and young families and doing what we can for them. And also the thrift store, nonprofit thrift store sales tax exemption was passed also. So that we've been discussing that quite a bit, because clothes get taxed when they're new, and then when they're sold in a nonprofit thrift store for charity, they get taxed again. And so that bill, I don't have the number of it, but I believe it's going to the Senate as well. And then income tax, we have hybrids now. The income tax I talked about last time is still alive, the 1.5 flat, but we came up with a hybrid model which has 800 and 1600 tax credit that is also applied to lower income tax brackets. So the bracket would come down to 1.9 instead of 1.5. And so it was a compromise between the tax credit idea, which really only helps North Dakota people, and then your tax income when you just take a flat income tax. Some of those people who have income and live in Minnesota, they would actually be paying that tax to Minnesota instead of North Dakota as you make that transition. So some people didn't like that. So right now we have a hybrid between two bills, and it's pretty much what we talked about last time. It's not a lot more money. I would have liked to have seen us put a little more money in, but this session's not over yet, so we'll just see how it goes. Also, too, on PERS, we have two bills, 1040, and I'm not sure which bill. Representative Casper has a bill where the political subs would have to pay for their deficiencies. And I've been pretty vocal about supporting Representative LaFour's bill, and not because he's my running mate, but he is my running mate, but I like his bill better. I think it makes better policy because the legislature actually made the mistake that put us in the situation we're in. So the political subs did not. Now, technically, you could say, well, they have the money to pay it, but if we didn't want them in the system, we shouldn't have invited them. So we invite them to come in, and then when we were over 100%, the legislature, I wasn't there, but the legislature could not resist, and they increased the multiplier, and they gave away some benefits. And by the actions that the legislature took, we are now in a deficit. We also had a plan to pull it out of the deficit when I first came into office, and that was 1% for 4 years. And the Senate wanted to do it, and we had a chairman of appropriations who said, I won't do the last year because I think it's going to turn around. I want to save that 1%. So, and he's very frugal. And so that didn't work out. So he did save the 1%, but it didn't work out. And it's now ballooned to like, I don't know, 1.6 billion in debt. And so we should have done a lot of things at the state level. The legislature is an interesting animal as I watch it kind of from my perspective. I see that sometimes we do things that, you know, make us popular and make us, you know, we want to be nice and we want to get along. And so some of our decisions probably weren't the hard decisions that needed to be made 10, 15 years ago. And we are where we are right now, and we are going to take care of our retirees. That's a contract we have with them, and I'm really excited to make sure that we have enough funding. We have infusions of cash going in, and then we have some money that will come up every session. And we go to something kind of, it's called the ADEC. I won't go into any of that because it's hard for me to explain it, but it's basically when they need money, we have to infuse a little more. If they don't need money, then that percentage will come down, and then we can save a little money. So we're going to watch it closely and get it fully funded within 21 years because we owe that, and it is a contract. And the reason I really support closing it is because I just don't think the legislature is disciplined enough to ride this every 2 years, because once it goes over 100% funding, they will also be tempted again to take that money out. And so I think we need to go to a different way of chasing it, so to speak. So anyway, those are those, and let me see here if I've covered everything. We have a new one for rare earth minerals coming, a sales tax exemption. We haven't had that on the floor yet, but that is for coal mines. If they add a rare earth processing plant right beside the existing mine, what they'll do is they'll wash the lignite and pull off any type of rare earth that they think they can make money on it. And then when that coal goes back to that electric generating facility, it is charged its regular tax, whatever's left over. So they just get the break on when they're taking the rare earth out of it. And also I found something very interesting. In one of our committee discussions, they said rare earth minerals are not really rare earth. They're just dispersed so evenly everywhere. It's rare to find them in a concentrated amount. So we do have some places in North Dakota that could see new mining, but they think the first rare earth extraction will probably happen at existing mines because they actually have the supply and they're all set up, and it's going to be a little bit easier to do that rather than starting afresh. But we do have some areas of interest for them in western North Dakota. So, and then in Government and Veterans Affairs, real quickly, we have a bill that limits the ability of the governor to close polling locations. We have a Protect Israel bill. We have a multi-candidate committee bill where if these big PACs come in, that they would have to disclose how much money they spent and who for, and or against an issue, or so there's more information for the public on who is spending money on candidates. And then we also have a bill that would require a legislator to introduce all bills unless it comes straight to appropriations. All agency appropriations bills would go straight to Appropriations Committee. But agencies who are bringing policy changes would not just, like right now, they just put a bill in and their deadline is usually December 15th. So for example, if Auditor Gallion had a policy change he wanted, he would need a legislator's name on there. And there's 141 of us, so I'm sure you can find somebody. They used to do it that way, and then the legislators thought, this is, just let them bring it, and now we're going full circle again and saying, well, we think they need a name on the bill. And then House Concurrent Resolution 3005, the governor must call the legislature into session if there's a veto after the legislature has left town, and that goes on the ballot for you to vote on. And that way, he can't ride, if you have a really tough, contentious bill, and it goes up to the last day of the session, it gives, there's other bills too that let us call ourselves back in to handle a veto, because you don't want to play games with that. And then we have another one that we have quite a few ESG bills, environmental social guidance bills, where we have more transparency. Is North Dakota investing or investing with companies who are working against some of the values of our state, for example, fossil fuels? And we have an all energy policy, but there are companies that are working to see the demise of some of our industries. And so there are some bills that say, well, if you don't want to work with us, we don't want to work with you either. And then also on foreign investments, and then encouraging rebidding these financial consultants who are possibly investing with China. And so also there's some, and this is what you'll hear is that, like, for example, a Chinese pornography company might have a 27 rate of return on their company, and we have a fiduciary responsibility on some of our trust funds that we always get the highest amount of money, because by Constitution it says that. It doesn't say, you can say, well, I don't really think that's a good value. I mean, I don't think it's a good thing to do. And so you'll see more and more of that discussion about who we invest with, and do we allow China and some of the countries that we might be, that are not our friends, how much do we invest with them, and do we let them invest with us? So anyway, that's what I have on that so far. And the obscenity bill on libraries passed yesterday. That was 1205. And that one is not about banning books. It is about not allowing pornography in libraries, because the libraries are in the exempt from the obscenity code. So we actually had a situation on the floor of the House where the gentleman, Representative Satcham, was carrying the bill, and he asked me, he said, should I take pictures from this book and lay it on everybody's desk? And I said, the only place you could do that would be in the library, and we're not a library. Because some of the pictures were really tough to look at, and they are protected in the obscenity code so far. But it is not about banning books at all, and I would hope that people would keep an open mind about, in the bill, the obscenity bill 1205, it lists exact types of cartoon visuals that would not be allowed for children. And we already have that in law for other businesses, and so that's all it does, is just says if you have this type of cartoon visual and it's obscene, it is not okay. So anyway, with that I will close, and I appreciate your time.
We're into the second half of our forum. It'll be Senator Kessel, then it'll be questions and comments for the state auditor, then we open it up to all questions and comments until noon. Senator Kessel.
Thank you. On a quick note on what Vicki was saying on the obscenity thing, we passed the bill through the Senate as well, and I'm assuming between the House version and the Senate version, they'll come to terms on where this needs to fall out at, and hopefully we're not going to imprison anybody over it. So looking forward to see if we can get that out and do a good job on that. Couple things got brought up. I'll go. I'm not on the agriculture, but I want to talk a little bit about agriculture. There's been a lot of negotiations going on the corporate farming thing. I think between all groups involved, I think they came to some terms, and I think there's something that's very tolerable going to come out. I believe it came out of ag. I don't know if it passed through the House yet on ag, but we will be voting on that, or they will be voting on that, and they'll be sending it over to the Senate. But I think they found common ground, and I think they can move forward with that. So that's kind of a big thing. Another thing on the ag front I want to talk a little bit about is North Dakota just filed a lawsuit again with the federal government on WOTUS again. I think we're one of, I believe it's 24 or 28 states. So we're back on board of that because it's overreach from the federal government on that, and that's where we need to be with that. But we have another one facing us, and it's ESA, the Endangered Species Act, that is we're facing right now. A week ago I was in Washington, D.C., and I got to sit in on some meetings and listen to some of the ramifications of what's coming with ESA. We should be very scared in the state of North Dakota with that. It is an absolute detriment to our agriculture community. An example being, if you're in ag, you're going to have to 6 months out tell them what you want to apply and where you want to apply it, and get permission from EPA to apply that herbicide, pesticide, or chemical on that particular piece of ground, and they will give that back to you. And if they determine that there is an endangered species, a worm, a butterfly, what have you, on that particular piece of ground, they will shut you down. So we need to be very, very concerned about that. And the trickle down from that is, it's not only from them particular grounds on the ag side, that'll overflow into our energy community and all lands around it. So we need to be very concerned about that. We did write a resolution, I believe it's 4014. I got it into late bills. It got through late bills. We'll probably hear on it after crossover here. Talk a little bit about the auditor stuff. 1508 has not been through the Senate yet. So despite I have not voted on that bill, even though I heard I voted on that bill, I did not. But I will commend the auditor for coming in energy and natural resources. I think we came to a compromise on some of our small municipalities, fire departments, ambulance services. Anything with a $2 million budget or under is not going to be subject to an audit. They will be subject to a review, but not an audit. I think I have that right there. So they will be looked at on what they're doing with their funds and how that's done, but they will not be subject to a paid audit, because the cost of the audits were, in some of these small, that $10, $12, $30,000 is huge to their budgets. Some of the complaints were, if we need fallout gear for a fire department, we feel much better about protecting our volunteer firefighters with that money than we do paying it out to an audit. So I think that was a good compromise. I really look forward to that because I think that's going to be extremely helpful. Along with that, we've also recognized the fact that they cannot take their budgets, the stuff that is government funded money, they need to go ahead and do their accounting differently. In other words, if they got funds for their food and water and other stuff that they have, they need to put that and maintain them in different funding mechanisms rather than in their actual budget. The other thing that we learned over this thing too, if you're getting grant monies and stuff for a new fire truck, an example, and the cost of that, the dollars are really high, that needs to be noted, and they need to manage that and handle that differently within their budgets. So that's on that stuff. Probably some of the biggest things that we've dealt with in the last several weeks comes to the CO2 legislation that has came down. We got the Summit Pipeline over in coming through eastern North Dakota, going over to the Beulah area for sequestering there. A lot of angst over that, a lot of misinformation going along with that. The company probably could have did a lot better job of how they approached this project. I think there's been some lessons well learned. We in North Dakota people know North Dakota values and what's important to North Dakota. If you got a company that comes in and they hire people from Texas and Louisiana, it doesn't go so well for them to come out and talk to our people in North Dakota. Hence is part of the problem. We had people coming in and they were looking at laws that are in other states and not laws or the way we do business in North Dakota. When they sent their landmen out, their landmen came from places that they just automatically, evidently in them areas, they just come in and they have the right to go on people's property to survey. And when they get jumped about it, they say, well, if you don't want us to do this, we're just gonna implement eminent domain. That's not the way we do business in North Dakota. So we took a look at, there's been, I believe, 12 bills that came through this CO2 legislation stuff that we're dealing with. A lot of misconception about eminent domain. A lot of people claiming that threats were made to them that they're going to introduce eminent domain. Not fully true. They had to, when they finally got back on track on this, these folks have to disclose that because CO2 is a common carrier, yes, they can use eminent domain. Are they doing it? No, they are not using eminent domain right now. So we had to look at, again, 12 different bills, how we can go ahead and we can implement some stuff for the protection of the landowners, along with protecting an industry that has an economic impact in the state of North Dakota of, I'm looking at the coal industry, 5.4 billion, oil industry, 40.2 billion, agriculture, 30.88 billion. We had to protect what we're doing here. The North Dakota legislature had the foresight 15 years ago to know that things were going to change here and how we need to deal with CO2, sequestering, and where the future of energy and everything is going. So I know I'm kind of all over the place, but this all intertwines and how this all works. So we started out with some of the legislation, one of them being we passed a bill that if they come to do surveys, they have to get written permission before they can go on the land. No ifs, ands, or buts. They have to have permission to get on that land before they ever go and do surveys. So we passed that through. The second bill that came through it was about compensation, that they wanted to 30% over whatever it was if they introduce eminent domain, that they would have to compensate for 30% over what the going appraised value is. Well, that cuts both ways. If it's an appraised value, it might be appraised value of, let's say, farmland at $2,000 an acre, $3,000 an acre, that would give you 30% over. What we found out is, on average, they're paying in the tens of $1,000s an acre for right-of-way. So they're already compensating well above that. So rather than making that law and slowing projects down, because at that rate it would slow everyone down, no one would ever sign on to do a project because I'll just wait for eminent domain. They're going to give me 30% over. We chose to go ahead and introduce a study on that and look at the economic impact of what that would have to moving projects forward. So that bill again passed with a study to see what that would look like. After that, the other bills start coming. And it was about, one of the bills that I carried on the floor had to do with common carrier status of CO2. Again, I want to go back to the foresight that the state had 15 years ago or so about how to lay out the regulatory, the tax, the legal framework of CO2 and how to get it into amalgamation, which is an area not a lot unlike when they pool oil areas, where they go ahead and they pull the oil in from all areas. So the state took a look at that and wondered how we could do that, knowing that this is where we're going to go in the future. Along with that, I think it was 20 years ago, CO2 pipelines became a common carrier status, or they got common carrier status. A lot of people are upset because Summit, the one building this pipeline, does not feel that they deserve common carrier status because they're making money off the 45Q payments off of this. The fact of the matter is, once these pipelines get built, there will be other people tying into them, so it will be a common carrier status. So, again, all this stuff kind of ties together, and the misconceptions of all this are they're unfounded. We need to realize how big and the impact of this stuff is. An example being, I think it's 2228 that failed here, I believe yesterday. That particular legislation, if that would have passed through, we would have killed the Coal Creek Station. That last legislature got all up and running again, and we saved that power plant. That would have killed that power plant. We would have not been able to take the CO2 off that power plant and inject it into that pore space. We couldn't do that. It would kill the Project Tundra, and that has to do with storing natural gas in pore space. We would have killed that project. We would have killed, there I got several of them here. We would have killed the Red Trail Energy project that went on over here at Richardson. We would have killed that. The Denbury project in Bowman, North Dakota, we would have killed that project. The GCC, well, that would be Coal Creek. There's, you know, Denbury down there wants to expand on that. And it would also kill the enhanced oil recovery projects that we got moving forward. And to put an example on how big that is, I have some numbers here on what that will do to the Bakken. Let's see what we got here. Anyway, we will, if we can incorporate in enhanced oil recovery, we can start using CO2 in there, we can extend the life of the Bakken. Even if we don't drill any more wells, we can expand and extract, if not twice as much, 3 times as much oil out of them zones, which, by the way, 55% or 55 cents out of every dollar comes from the energy industry, is what we use to run this state. This is very, very, we need to do this right. We needed to get this right. And yes, we took a lot of heat because they said we were taking away private property rights from people. On the contrary, we are trying to protect them the best we can. By the way, we're trying to protect them private property rights on both sides of the aisle. We got people out there that want these projects. They want to make the money off them. So we got to look at them as well as those that don't. So this has been extremely controversial stuff. It's very hard to get through it, but we cannot come in. We offered up some amendments to some of these bills that gave some wins. The carrier of them bills did not want them wins. He wanted it all. It was scorched earth. He wants it all. It would have destroyed our economy in the state of North Dakota from the energy and from the agricultural side of things. So these were not easy conversations to have. We did the best we could to address these issues, and I think we did an awfully good job to address them. What we probably are not addressing is explanation to the public of how complex these issues are for what we do here in North Dakota. So I guess I've spent an awful lot of energy on this particular stuff. I mean, it's been consuming us for 2 weeks here. So I guess with that, I know we're behind already.
Well, let's catch up. Thank you, Senator Kessel. Our state auditor came from the central time zone having not had breakfast. I know he got a donut, so he's going to ride that sugar high as far as it'll take him, but
You had one too. Those are fantastic.
Yeah.
Those are great.
it goes to you for public questions and comments. I go to my trusty deck of cards. This is a way of getting you in line for your comment without making you stand in a line. Raise your hand if you have questions specific to the state auditor's office first. Okay, I see one back there. Okay, a couple. Here we go. Okay, and then I'll come back. I want you to use this. This is for the sake of the consolidated recording of our broadcast today. And then I'll be looking for all other questions and comments shortly.
So can I make just a couple of comments here with some things that were brought up? So Vicki talked about these agency bills and preventing agencies from submitting legislation directly. As an agency head, I think that is fantastic legislation, especially in light of term limits. We need more collaboration between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and I think restricting agencies from just submitting bills is a fantastic move forward. I have actually already done that. This legislative session, I have 0 agency bills. Everything that we have done is through a legislator. In fact, Senator Kessel brought up that very thing. Senate Bill 2180 is a bill that I worked on with Senator Jerry Klein and Representative Don Vigasaw to raise that threshold. And again, if we zoom out a little bit, take a little bit of a different perspective, last session we addressed, or we understood that there was an issue with local governments and audit costs. We raised that threshold up to $750,000, and we realized that we didn't go far enough. So going up to $2 million that he talked about, and so that's the cutoff. If you receive more than $2 million in an annual period, you need an audit. And the reason why we settled on $2 million, we're seeing our audit costs go up. 10 years ago, we had over 20 firms operating in the state of North Dakota providing audit services to government agencies. Today, we're down to 11. And so we have seen a drastic decline in the number of firms helping local governments. And anytime you have supply and demand issues, when that demand, the supply decreases and the demand is still high, costs go up. And so we are seeing that on these local entities. That's why we want to see 2 million. That will reduce the total number of audits needed across the state by nearly 100 entities. Instead of having a $20,000 audit bill, they come through our review process. We can still have that transparency. That may happen for about $1,000. So again, the auditor's office is very aware of the challenges facing local governments. We are trying to work with legislators to address these, and so I appreciate bringing it up. I also appreciate Vicki's red vote on 1508 and way to go. The bill is before appropriations, so we're really hoping that we can get a do not pass out of appropriations and see this bill just go away on the House side. But we're counting on Representative Kreidt here to take up the charge on that one, maybe. Questions? This is my favorite part. What's important to you?
Okay, we go back here. Provide us with your name, if you would, please.
Dale Berwick, candidate for Vice Chair of District 39. Mr. Gallion, how many entities, fire departments, EMTs have you put out of business by finding them for faults that you found in their operating budgets or financial budgets?
How many have we put out of business? 0. So the one that comes up right now, it's a lot of discussion, is the Killdeer Ambulance District. It's important to note, again, when you back out and you get a bigger picture, That Killdeer Ambulance District was in very dire financial position. The county had already come to a decision that they were not going to provide any more funding because that entity could not demonstrate their financial position. When we were finally notified of this and we were called in to the situation, we could not find their accounting records. We had to actually reach out to an employee that is no longer there. They had moved out of state. It took us quite a while to even track down the information. We were able to step in, get them back on sound financial footing, and yes, this audit, from their perspective, very costly, $46,000. Except, again, I would clarify, it's not an audit. We looked at 4 fiscal years. We prepared 4 financial statements for them. We conducted that audit. They now have the ability to go back to their county. They use those financial statements to receive funding from the county level. This district is now on much better footing. This is a vital service to your community, and the reason why we stepped in is because they were on a path to no longer being in business without our help. And the county was kind of cutting them off. But now, doing so, they have those records, their ability to obtain additional funds, and hopefully being able to demonstrate their financial responsibility to the citizens. The next time a mill levy comes up, that district will be able to come in, and if they need additional resources, that community will support them. Keep in mind, if the Killdeer Ambulance District goes under, the nearest ambulance service is going to be over an hour away. We understand that at the auditor's office. We also want to make sure they're good fiscal stewards of your money. And so we always seek to try to find that balance. Thank you. Good question. We're always trying to get more information out to the bigger picture for people to understand. So excellent. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Ken Nelson, and I'm from Dickinson, North Dakota. And once upon a time, I was an auditor for the Bremer Corporation, and that's a rather large financial institution. Maybe not so much anymore, but it certainly was. Anyway, all I know is about auditing is audits, good audits, save everybody money. And I want to thank you for doing that. So, but I will add one comment, is that like a good doctor, you need to go and take in a class on bedside manner, because some people don't like to hear what a doctor has to say the very first go-around.
I would agree with that statement. Sometimes audit reports are difficult to receive, and you know, our goal is to try to make sure that we provide that truthful, objective information. And yes, sometimes that is hard. But what we've learned in our communication strategy that we've deployed, when we're operating in a legislator's backyard, if we're going to have a difficult audit report, I do make it a point to reach out to those legislators in that community, because some of the discussion we've had is they don't like being caught off guard. We're aware of that, and so we try to do a better job. Now, that's difficult to time because I can't talk about a pending audit with anybody, legislators included. And so we do have a very small window that we try to operate within. But now, today, we do a much better job at that than maybe we did several years ago. Good question. Any other questions from me? I love questions. This is my favorite time.
Anything else for now for the state auditor? Stay if you're able. You might get called back up. If you need to take off, we understand. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Hands in the air, all other questions and comments. Okay? Hands in the air now helps me size up time-wise how we're doing.
John Oderman, Dickinson. This is for Representative Steiner, and I guess the others might have comments on it too. But you had mentioned the rejuvenation of like the wells that were drilled in the 2010s. And I was just wondering if there's been any discussion about those wells that were vertical wells that were drilled in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, going back there and maybe drilling horizontals on those, or rejuvenating those wells as well, the ones that are just vertical right now. It might be, this is an easy question, so
Yeah.
if you haven't heard about it, then
I was ready to say thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Oderman. I'm in that frame of mind right now. We have not discussed other wells. In fact, I asked the question when we had the hearing on the restimulation. Marathon was testifying about this restimulation bill, and it was, that bill is really about their Bakken assets, and it is not about them actually going out and looking at Tyler or other older wells. Those wells actually could possibly be considered, but it really was about getting that parent that was first drilled in 2008 to 2015 with the new technology to see if we can push out the frack rock. And so they did not, he actually said, no, they're not looking at moving into the older wells, is what Marathon said, but that was the only comment we had from one company.
Okay, where did question number 2 land? There we go. Okay.
My name is Christine Command. I'm from Chasing Horses Wild House Advocates. I want to thank you, Senator Kessel, for your work in the committee and for carrying the resolution SCR 414 to the Senate floor and unanimous voting in favor of it. I understand it moves to the House now, and I just wanted to see if you guys had anything to say about the bill, either in the Senate or the process now through the House, and when we might see that.
Yeah, I got one comment on that. Those that you were following, the morning that I had that resolution to hit the floor, it came out on the sheet as a do not pass. So I walked into the leader's office and I asked him, I says, you know, there's one hanging tree left in my door, and I says, was that designated for me? Because if I go and I read the resolution and I say a do not pass on there, I says they'll be using it. I'll be the subject of the new movie like they had up in Watford City. The other comment I have about that, the resolution to keep the horses is fine, but more importantly, this ESA thing, endangered species thing, in my mind, the Park Service has got a lot bigger picture on this, and there's a reason they're letting the prairie dogs go. They need to have a big enough area, they need to have big enough populations, because yes, they want to introduce the black-footed ferret again. You introduce the black-footed ferret, now we have other problems. They get outside the park, that becomes territory that you cannot run cattle on. You would not be, if they got on your farmland, you could not farm that land because it's an endangered species. We need to get on top of this endangered species thing. It's big, it's really big. There's ulterior motives in my mind, what they're how they're approaching this thing. So, and yes, we need to keep the horses there. They've been part of the park, they've been part of the park for probably everyone here that lived here their life. They've been part of the park our whole lives. So anyway, with that.
Okay, a follow-up topic remains horses in the park. We'll go right here.
Yeah, for those of you that are on high cholesterol or something, now would be a good time to take your pill. My name's Wally Owen. I was a concessionaire in the National Park for about 20 years. I was involved in the Sierra Club as a president. You ever wonder what happened to the mountain sheep and drilling? I was a part of that. You don't even hear about it anymore because we solved that problem. Bureaucratic policy based on politically influenced preferences, circumventing legislative oversight, ignoring public and/or legislative input and intent, making their own laws without representation. That is where we're at now with our bureaucratic policies. Our legislators will tell you they've given too much power to them. They can put you in jail. Passed in 1973, the Endangered Species Act is our nation's most effective law to protect species from extinction. The ESA is the only piece of environmental legislation to date that does not demand a cost-benefit analysis before going into action, making it uniquely effective. Once species is declared threatened or endangered, the ESA ensures that it will be protected and all efforts will be made to assist in its recovery. The ESA provides a framework to conserve and protect endangered and threatened species and their habitats, both domestically and abroad. Connect the dots, ladies and gentlemen. ESA principal parts are the listing and protection of a species, black-footed ferret. Theodore Roosevelt National Park is in the middle of the black-footed ferret's historical range. Number two, it designates the designation of critical habitat. When you go through the Theodore Roosevelt National Park and you see the prairie dogs, and every one of you that have has said, why don't they manage them? They are managing them. They are managing them to introduce the black-footed ferret. Okay? That's the critical habitat. And avoidance of its destruction. Once these things all come together, they got the law then for avoidance of the destruction. They shut down oil fields. They'll shut down farms, ranches, within miles of it. I support the introduction of the black-footed ferret, just to be upfront with you all. And the wolves that'll follow, and the bears. This is what happens. This is what their grassland ecosystem plan is. It's a good plan. Can we trust them to manage it? Well, look what they've done with the horses. Once a species becomes listed as threatened, it receives special protections by the federal government. The laws also protects against interfering in vital breeding and activities or degrading critical habitat. That's the reason they're getting rid of the horses. They compete with grazing, etc. Okay? And that gives them a lot of power. The black-footed ferret is critically endangered with approximately 300 now living in the wild at a dozen sites. In the early 1900s, there was considered agricultural pests, and there was estimated to be millions in the wild. Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota now has 60 of them. Incidentally, a ferret eats about 100 prairie dogs each year. Theodore Roosevelt National Park is approximately in the middle of the historical range. Threats to the ferret include habitat, prairie dog, loss of it, plague, and the intolerance of humans. What happens with their management program with the horses and stuff is and it happens in other states. It's already happened. Human interference is every rancher starts carrying strychnine in their saddlebags. Every farmer's got a rifle, and every time a prairie dog shows up, it's going to be a dead prairie dog. And that's not in the best interest of the prairie dog. It could be arranged that this could work out and be a win-win situation for everybody, but because of this Endangered Species Act, they don't think they need to even turn down our legislature when asked to extend the period. Can you imagine? A bureaucrat say, no, North Dakota, we're getting input, but not from our state legislature. Okay, I get excited about it. I should took my medication. Threats to the ferret include the loss of habitat, human intolerance. The biggest threat to the black-footed ferret is the lack of suitable habitat and the continued decline of the prairie dog. Endangered black-footed ferrets habitat, the Wolf Creek area in Wyoming, where they canceled about thousands of acres of leases. Black-footed ferrets require large complex of prairie dogs colonies of 10,000 acres or more. Where are you going to find 10,000 acres or more but on national grasslands or in that national park? Okay. Black-tailed prairie dog colonies are surveyed. This is good for you to keep in mind if you don't think this is active. Black-footed prairie dog colonies are surveyed every 6 years by the North Dakota Game and Fish Department to estimate population status. The U.S. Forest Service, Dakota Prairie Grasslands Office conducts surveys every 3 years, and Theodore Roosevelt National Park checks their towns out every year. Black-footed ferret, and once they got enough prairie dogs and they got enough land, they're going to introduce it, and I don't think they have to do it publicly. I think they can, with this Endangered Species Act, they'll just put them in and say, hey, policy gives us that authority. Can Theodore Roosevelt National Park be trusted to manage the ferret within their boundaries? When considering their management and history with the horses, can't manage them, get rid of them. The elk, can't manage them, shoot them. We have hunting in our national park. Weeds, roads, interpretation, trails, water, maintenance, all speak for themselves. What happens when the ferret leaves the park? That's the key now, is we need to negotiate and make sure when they leave that park, they're open. They're not protected on the EIS. Let's get them introduced in the park, but let's manage them, and not the way they're doing it. I support the introduction of the black-footed ferret and the natural consequences, the wolf and the bear, to recreate the grassland ecosystem. Senator, we may disagree on this in the future, but we respect each other enough that it'll be a good debate. No species has the right to eliminate another species and has a moral responsibility to protect them. It's the bureaucratic method being employed that should be of concern. Thank you.
You'll notice I haven't cut anyone short yet, and thank you for being prepared with your remarks. The National Park has come up 6 out of 6 sessions. We have 3 more, March 11, 18, and 25. I know I have 3 more questions out in the audience or comments. Number 3, where's number 3 at? Yeah. Okay, topic's been covered here. We'll move to number 4.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here today, and especially that we have these forums so we could speak what's on our mind and what's on our heart, because we're in a transition period to where changes are happening rapidly now. And if we don't go out and speak, then of course we're conformed to somebody's idealism. Back in 1970, I'm try to make this as short as I can. Back in 1970, the EPA was founded to secure environmental rights and look out for the good of the people. So back in 1973, the EPA, along with this administration, Richard Nixon administration, agreed that we would try to secure this nation as far as controlling the environment by first establishing that CO2s are bad and we need to control it. And then, of course, humans are responsible for this mess that they call as climate change. I've studied this thing for 2-3 years on climate change, and the more you understand about it, you have to look at who's doing the research. We have scientists that have done great things for this nation. And all these scientists that have done great things say they're absolutely against climate change and the theories of it. And they actually say this is a really control mechanism. CO2 is a control mechanism to put us into eventually tyranny. And I'm here today to say that we have to step up to the plate and make a change. Because if it's left undone, then of course we're subject to the actions of those who are promoting this falsehood of it's our fault. So my thinking on CO2, we brought that up today. We shouldn't have anything to do with CO2. If they want to bring our CO2 and pay us, our plants could use CO2 up here. Any farmer understands that you have to have soil for a good plant, and out of that soil produces a fruit of that seed. So, but also that plant uses oxygen. And if anybody understands, well, up here in June and July we have plenty of oxygen. We actually need CO2 to make our plants grow. So, control mechanisms, and they're very hidden. And we need to expose. We need to get more interest in what they're doing, because everything they do is really has a different motivation to it. So I think that's basically, I made my point.
Okay. Where did number 5 end up? There. Okay, we're back to number 5. You know, we'll go till noon. I could get a couple other questions or comments in after this one. We're back to Mr. Berwick.
Thank you, Dale Berwick, District 39. Senator Kessel, I apologize. My comments to you earlier were not intended for you. Actually, Representative Kempnick, but I don't know, you were standing in front of me, so. This is just a generality. especially these last two sessions have really gotten my dander up the way they're being operated. But probably the worst thing of all is what I feel is the bureaucracy, and that's been brought up before. Is there any way to rein this back in? I know you're a freshman and whatnot, but we got to get a handle on these people somehow, these institutions.
I'd love to comment on that. As a junior coming in and been around there a little bit, when I came in and I got elected, I was not agenda driven. I never introduced one bill. I have one resolution I introduced on Endangered Species Act, but I didn't introduce one bill. I came in because I needed to learn the process. I didn't come in because I want to make more laws. I came in, I want to see the laws that we have, can we make them better? Can we protect the people we want? I don't want to go and make more laws. When you have legislators that come in and introduce 25 to 30 bills, and they want to come in with a wrecking ball and they want to destroy things, that's not acceptable. That's not how we do good legislation. We are spending time, in my mind, we are wasting time up there on redundant bills that we can't drill down into the meat of what we're trying to get to. Back to the CO2 issue. We're sitting there and we're trying to get down and we're trying to learn this. We're trying to figure it out. But when you're constantly going back to the table with something, and I'll just say, you have committee hearings, you hear from both sides. You go ahead, they amend their bills. When you got a legislator that comes in and during committee sits there and wants to negotiate and constantly until he can get his way, and then when you vote him down out of committee and you go to the floor and it's a do not pass and he brings it up and he tries to stand in the middle of the floor and negotiate his tactics again, negotiate it on the floor, and we spent days on dealing with stuff like this. Days. When we could be spending our time drilling down into good legislation and making better legislators out of us, learning the subject at hand, and not just come in and try to snowball effect and scorched earth in industry. It's not right. So you ask about bureaucracy and stuff like this, you need to educate yourself first of the subject at hand. Once you're educated, then and only then can you start legislating the way you need to legislate.
I guess really the comment wasn't for the legislators, although yes, there is a definite problem there. More towards, just to use one, Health and Human Services, the Health Department, Department of Education. I mean, they make their own rules, they thumb their nose at our legislature. I feel, and there's no repercussion.
So my comment to that, again, is coming in. Educate yourself so you know the department. Human Services, huge department. I mean, they're animals, they're big. But you got to educate yourself. What I can tell you right now, this term limit thing, I don't think we know what we did to ourselves in this state. I'm coming in, I'm trying to learn and not introduce bills because I want to be educated so I can make good, sound decisions on what I do. I'm not going to be able to do that 4 times there. This term, I am drinking from a fire hose. I'm trying to get up to speed. I got another session in my first term. It's all education. It's educating yourself on what you need to do. That gives you the next term to come in and maybe start implementing some of this stuff and making it right. The scariest part that I see moving forward is not just the ones that are the policy writers. I'm looking at appropriations. You're going to put some people in handling billions of dollars that have they just don't understand the concept of where the money came from and why things were put in place. And they're going to be put in charge of that. That's what your term limits did for you. Yesterday, we had a bill on the floor about annual sessions. It got voted down. And I was surprised by some of the legislators that got up and said, you know, no, it works pretty good the way it is. Me as a freshman coming in, I'm thinking to myself, this isn't working. We're trying to do all this stuff with no staff, and you're supposed to get yourself up to speed and respond back to you people, back our constituents, and then you get nasty emails because you're not responding back because you're so busy doing your other job. So that's a view from a freshman coming in. I tell you what, this is not good for the state of North Dakota the way we're going about it right now.
I have one there, then you're next.
I would love to make a comment on that. You saw the senator's passion about seeing how things are brought to the floor. The discussion on these bills is done in committee. 1508 had the same thing. Committee, do not pass. Overwhelming, 13-1. Comes to the floor, misinformation. The House floor, in a frenzy, votes to pass bad legislation. It's because they're overburdened. I heard the best line from Senator Terry Wanzik in Appropriations Committee. He said, in 2 years, how bad could North Dakota have gotten to have over 900 pieces of legislation? I thought that is fantastic. I mean, that's a great way to put this. I think here in North Dakota, we do it better than most. We demonstrate that time and time again. 900 bills. They're talking about a burden on them. The executive branch, we have to track all of that as well. We're always monitoring these things, the effects, and what these bills could do to agencies. So, again, his passion and being frustrated with those comments, I share that same level of passion and frustration because these discussions, they're had, but they're not heard.
When our series ends, you guys let us know whether you prefer the public comments or the email inbox. You know, we're going to go here and there, and that may take us to the noon hour.
Jeff Fitzik, Dickinson City resident. So this question is for Mr. Gallion, but just echoing on the comments that are around, this probably doesn't apply to the people here for the most part because you're here, but part of the problem that we're facing with what you guys were just discussing with bureaucracy and the overreaching effects of it, the education aspect of it, and everything else, in my opinion, is simply the lack of information that not only freshman legislators have and everybody else, but the public. We're not educated in civics anymore at the greater level. It's not even in most of the course curriculums in the high schools. And so how can you have an effective voice of the people informing legislature when they don't know what they're talking about, when they don't know what a district is? So it's incumbent on everybody, and of course, like I said, I exempted most of the people here. It's incumbent on everybody to be part of the process of reducing bureaucracy and educating our legislators and helping out. But on that note, on 1508, you'd mentioned earlier, Mr. Gallion, that the originator of the bill had not reached out to you at all on that issue when it was started. Has he reached out since to discuss matters with you? Or she? So,
and no.
Thank you.
Has still refused to contact the office and talk about any of these issues with us. At this point, it's before appropriations. So I'm hoping that Representative Kreidt here will be able to, again, pick up that mantle. But your comments about being engaged, educating yourself, that is what the auditor's office aims to do each and every day. Our form of government, our constitutional republic, only survives with informed and engaged citizens. So I applaud all of you for being here today to engage in this discussion, to learn how your government is spending your money. How are we operating on your behalf? I take all of these opportunities. That's why I love Q&A. I want to hear what's important to you. I want to know how the auditor's office can better support you. How can we put more information in your hands? That is why when I see these efforts to attack the auditor's office to prevent us from communicating information about your government to you, I take that very personal. It frustrates me greatly, and I push back. To me, the auditor's office, that's in my circle. And I will do great and terrible things to protect those in my circle because they work for you. And to stifle them, to silence them, that's preventing you from getting valuable information about your government. And that's wrong. As a constitutional officer, I work for you. You're my boss. I work for no one else. I don't report to the legislature. I do not work for the governor. And so each and every day that I'm the state auditor, I commit to you that we are going to continue putting that information out there, whether it's easy to hear or not. We're going to do the right thing. We are not going to do the popular thing, and sometimes that is difficult. But that is what I'm committed to.
Yeah, I'm a former civics teacher. I'm a former civics teacher. Thanks for coming to this elective class today. The bell's going to ring soon. One more question, comment from the front row here.
I am wondering how many people, you guys, have ever seen the map that was put out probably 50 years ago or more, and it was called, The Future of North Dakota. 2 Rutgers University people did it, the Buffalo Commons. And when you were talking about what they're talking about with this environmental species and stuff, have you seen this map?
Okay. If I saw a couple nodding heads there, if you don't mind closing us out today, talk about what maybe a map of North Dakota projected looked like 50 years ago and where you think we're at now.
What 50 years ago, they wanted to project what North Dakota would look like today.
Okay.
If they would have got their legislation passed.
Sure. Where are we at? Where are we headed?
If you're referring to the map of the Buffalo Commons, the idea was the young people were leaving, and as people passed away, eventually they would put more and more buffalo on the plains, and that eventually it would be back to buffalo roaming the plains because it wouldn't have worked out for people to live here. But I think you can see that that actually has not come to fruition. We're still hanging on, although we have some tough winters. But you know, I think with being able to work remotely now, the internet has actually opened up beautiful, safe, wonderful areas like Dickinson. So I think we continue to have that high quality of life that Carter supports, and we will continue to attract young people. Hopefully our tax situation draws them in as well. And then we don't have to worry about the buffalo because we'll have plenty of young people and lots of babies.
Normally I'd have a visual aid to show you what's left for the series. We're taking 2 Saturdays off. We come back March 11th. Guest will be Dr. Andrea Travnicek. The topic will be water resources. Okay. March 18th, Lieutenant Governor Tammy Miller. March 25th, Lynn Helms. Topic will be energy there, but of course we open it up to your questions and comments each and every week. That'll be all for our session today. Thanks again, everyone, for coming, and we'll see you next time.